Okay, welcome back. I hope that you took some time to do that activity. We're going to begin here in part two, identifying helpful analogies. So the goal of part one was for you to break your research down into its most basic fundamental components and identify what parts would require translation and what would not. Part two here is we're going to start talking about analogies. So the most effective way to translate those parts that require it is to create a good analogy. And like I said in the introduction, these skills will stay with you forever, and these analogies will stay with you forever. So by spending the time to think about this, you will identify an analogy that will work forever. You will always have this in your pocket to talk about your research. So the first point, of course, analogies can both help you and your audience understand your research. The analogy I discovered for explaining my science, which I will get to shortly, was a total game changer. It ended up becoming like a foundational principle in the way I talk about the brain. Like I said, find a good analogy and stick to it. Once you have one, you can use it forever. And don't oversimplify. Meet the audience in the middle. So people like to learn things, and your audience doesn't want to be explained to like a 5-year-old, right? They want to have some sense that they came away from it with an understanding of it. But like I said before, if you include too many acronyms and too much unnecessary information, you can actually inhibit that learning process. So meeting them in the middle, sharing just a little bit about the basic research and what you're sort of analogizing, but then giving them an analogy so they can hold on to it and remember it throughout your presentation and beyond is what's key. So let's start with my example of my research. So I showed you these figures that probably made you want to throw up. And what these are actually recordings from brain cells. So I'm not sure, I hope you can see my cursor, but you can see like here, there's this trace, we call this, and it's like a pulse. It's like a little zap. We're recording electrical currents from brain cells. And these are all being measured at, what we're measuring is the activity of brain cells at synapses, which you may have seen before. This is where brain cells communicate. So in order to explain these findings, I had to find a good analogy for this process in the brain, a synapse. And I found personally that the easiest way to explain this was a traffic light. Everybody understands what traffic lights are. Of course, we all drive. If we don't drive, we at least sit in the car and we see a traffic light. We know how they work. And I figured a good way to explain a synapse was an intersection. So in my analogy, the brain was a city, and each intersection with the traffic light was like a synapse. And the idea was that each synapse can send a positive or a negative signal. Brain cells can tell each other to activate or shut off at these synapses, just like a red light or a green light can tell traffic to stop or go. And the idea was the red lights in the brain may seem counterintuitive, but of course we need red lights, just like cities need red lights to prevent car accidents and traffic buildup. So another example of a good analogy is in my previous workshop, a student was talking about this cancer therapy where cells are removed from the body and given a certain treatment, and then they're put back into the body. And once they're given that treatment and put back into the body, they're able to more effectively fight and attack tumor and cancer cells. And this person was really struggling. They said, it's so hard to explain this research to people. They don't understand it. And so together we came up with the analogy of describing those cells as mercenaries. So you have these cells within your body. They are able to fight. They are willing to fight, but they don't have the training. And so they can be removed from the body and taught to fight these cancer cells and then put back in, and they will attack your cancer cells like mercenaries. So I found that to be a helpful analogy. And really the goal here is for you to identify something similar. So this is a very short part. This is going to require effort on your part. Unfortunately, I wish I could be there to chat with you individually and help you out. Although if you do choose to compete there and you end up moving on to the university level, I believe we'll have to double check with this. I will be available for individual consultations to chat about your presentation, and I will be happy to talk about these analogies. But for right now, you are going to have to do this on your own, where you will have to identify the least intuitive parts of your presentation and then consider the appropriate analogies. So part one is really important here. Identify the least intuitive parts. If you can, if you're struggling to identify those, if you can, I would recommend, grabbing someone, grab a friend nearby, or call someone up and say, hey, here are the top 5, or here are the 5 or 10 bullet points that describe my research. Which of these do you not understand, and which of these do you understand? And remember, like I showed in my example, you only need to find analogies for the parts that you actually intend to include in your presentation. In my case, I didn't need to come up with an analogy for the genetic mutation because I wasn't going to talk about it anyways. So start by identifying your core. Let's back up. Start by identifying your entire breakdown of your research, then identify your core, what's most interesting. And then within that core, what needs to be explained to make that make sense, which of those things are generally interpretable to the lay public and which are not. And again, make sure, check your assumptions, make sure that the things that you're assuming people understand, make sure that they actually do understand them. And then once you've done all that, now ask yourself, what analogies can be used to explain this? Good luck, and I will see you soon in part 3.